And here we go. Well, let's try this again.
You're good.
You're live.
Yeah?
Yep.
All right. So we are live. We are Purse Strings. So excited to be here today to present on Prenups and Postnups. Just a little bit about Purse Strings is Purse Strings was created so that women have a destination location they can go to for all things financial. So anytime a woman has a financial question, transaction, transition, maybe she's going to go through a divorce, get married, maybe coming into a big windfall, perhaps she wants to get out of debt, whatever her financial concerns might be, she can go to pursestrings.co, and we have tons of education, life and money guides, lots of resources on there. However, we also have a list of top-tier financial professionals that we've curated, looked across the landscape, looking for those professionals who really want to serve a female market. It's not everybody. So we're very picky, and we really want those professionals that we would, refer to our BFF, refer to our sister, refer to our sister-in-law, our daughter, someone that we know will be in good hands. So we look for financial planners, financial advisors, attorneys like we have with us today. We look for coaches. We look for all things financial, realtors, mortgage lenders. We have all of those on our site, and always looking to grow, to find more great professionals that we can promote as a Purse Strings approved professional to our communities of women. And what we do is we do a ton of Facebook Lives. This is one we're doing today. We stream through LinkedIn. We stream through our own Facebook group. We stream now in Instagram. So hello, everyone in Instagram land. So glad that we can see you out there and that you are also getting this information from Purse Strings. So Purse Strings is your go-to destination, pursestrings.co, for women. Anytime they have a financial question or concern, we're your go-to spot. So thank you for being here today. I think you're going to get some really great information. I know you will, from Michelle. At this point, I'm going to pass it over to my partner, Maggie, and she will drive this conversation. Have great fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that intro. Yes, we're so excited to be joined by Michelle Lawless today. And we are going to be talking about all things prenups and postnups. So before we get started, Michelle, could you just give us a little intro to yourself?
Sure. Hi. Thanks so much for having me. And my name is Michelle Lawless, and I am a family law attorney. Yes, that is my real last name. You can just get that out of the way right now. That is my real last name. And I have been doing family law for about 20 years. I cannot believe that, but it's actually been over 20 years. And I was with a large divorce litigation firm in the city, and recently went out. It's not recently anymore. It's about a year and a half. Pandemic brain. Time just has stood still and flown by at the same time. I started my own practice in June of 2020. And I'm a solo, and I'm in Chicago, serving mostly Cook County, but I do some Lake and DuPage cases as well. So I do kind of all things family law, except I do not do adoptions. So I do divorce and custody and prenups, postnups, which we're going to be talking about today, child support, jurisdictional issues with, which can come up in family law if people have multiple residences. So it's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Well, we're so excited to have you here today. Since we're talking all of February about money and marriage, we thought, we need an attorney in here talking about prenups and postnups, because that is a huge thing that isn't actually that talked about that much. And I think it's a stereotypical thing that it's something only rich people might have, or if you have loads and loads of wealth. So I'm glad we get to dive into this discussion today. So let's just start out with what is a prenup?
So a prenup is an agreement that two people who are planning to get married will enter into. And a prenup, also called a premarital agreement, prenuptial agreement, must be signed prior to the wedding. So that is a critical element to being a legal prenuptial document, is you have to sign it prior to the marriage. And I know we're going to get into kind of like what can go into it and why you would do one, but that is what a prenup is. And then a postnup, postmarital agreement, would be an agreement that a couple would enter into for a specific reason after they're already married.
And does that have to be in place like within a year of marriage, or just any time like throughout the marriage you can go ahead?
It is, I mean, a postnup, so there's this thing called consideration in the law for it to be a valid, legally binding contract. And the wedding is the consideration, not to get to like bar exam here, but the wedding is the consideration when you do a premarital agreement, because people are entering into this agreement and then they're going to go get married. So a postnup, you would need to talk through with a lawyer about really what the reason for the postnup is, because there's so many reasons a couple could do a postnup after they get married, whether it's 1 year after the marriage or 10 years after the marriage. There'd be a lot of different reasons that you would do it.
Awesome. Awesome. So then, yeah, so it's this document you do. Usually the prenup is before the wedding. And so what are some typical reasons people would want a prenup done?
So that's usually the first question I ask someone when they come to me, whether they're on the receiving end of a document that another lawyer has drafted, or they're, coming and saying, I need a prenup drafted. That is the number one. That is literally like the first question that I will ask. I'm like, what are you hoping to accomplish with a prenup? And I want to hear from them just in their own words. Why do they think they need one?
Mm-hmm.
So common things that I hear are, my parents want me to get one. And so
That's amazing.
That usually means that someone is anticipating that they're going to be receiving an inheritance or some wealth passed down within their parents' lifetime after their parents pass away, and their parents want to make sure that that is protected. So that's a common one. Another common one could be, this is a second marriage for both of us. We have children from a first marriage, and we went through a terrible divorce. We paid lawyers so much money in our divorce, or one of them did. And we just want to make sure that if it doesn't work out, we have a document which we just can kind of, everything is smooth. We don't have to pay a lot of money to get divorced.
Right.
Those are the two. I don't know if there's like a common reason people do them, but those are ones that really people I hear over and over again.
And that's interesting how they just kind of say it's my parents. It's not like I'm inheriting, I'm going to get this wealth, I want to make these decisions, but my parents tell me to do it.
Yeah, and it's awkward. Like that's kind of the thing that I hear the most from people when they come in for a prenup. Whether they're the party that wants it or the party that doesn't want it, is this is, most of the time people will admit this is a really uncomfortable conversation to have. And some people that, will say my fiance absolutely does not want to do this, and I'll kind of say, well, have you, what are the conversations that you've had surrounding that? And I think that's really important, because I always say to people, look, if you're getting married, this should be one of the happiest times of your life, right?
Right.
So we need to approach this in a way. If someone does not want to sign a prenup, or they have preconceived notions about prenups and what they mean, and you need to make sure that you're having really collaborative, productive conversations. And you need to make sure both people have the right lawyers to have those conversations. So no one feels as though they're kind of being quote unquote iced out while you're at a wedding. And I think it really is surprising to me how many people are not on the same page.
I remember like when we were kind of having our conversation to prep for this, and I've never been, married or engaged. And so I don't always know, but it seems like, they'd be the person that you'd be able to have the most open, transparent conversations with. And as we've been learning through this month, like money is still very hard to talk about. We all have different money stories. We all come from different places and have different mindsets around it. But again, like this is the person that you want to be with, forever. And so it's interesting. And you said that some people kind of almost get delivered the papers like a divorce, more or less, than like, let's have this conversation. What's our goal? I want to do this prenup for X and Y reason, which was just so like, I still can't stop thinking about that. And
I think that it comes from a place of just not wanting to deal with it. coming from a place of like, oh, well, then I can stand behind my lawyer and just say, well, you don't like that. I didn't want that. My lawyer just put that in there. I think that I mean, the way that I've kind of developed my way of doing prenups is let's make sure everyone's on the same page before you pay a lawyer to put pen to paper. Because not only do you want to save attorney fees, or at least most people want to save attorney fees, but I've been on the receiving end of prenups. And when I explained what is in here to the client, I have watched people fall apart because they're jumping from what's in the document in their head to assuming this was asked for by the other side. This is how their fiance feels about. I mean, you just go from A to Z, and that's hard to absorb. Mm-hmm. Not only is it a foreign legal document that you have to have a lawyer interpret for you. That's
it's all in jargon.
Already like army, like I have to hire a professional to interpret what the person I'm marrying says that they want to do if we get divorced. Like that's, no one wants that. So
right.
I think it's important for both parties to tell their respective attorneys what they're trying to accomplish. And if it's a difficult conversation, have that conversation before pen is put on paper.
Right.
So no one feels like they're just getting kind of, like you said, like almost served with divorce papers. And the other thing I would say is you have to do this as far in advance of your wedding as possible. There is nothing like, 2 weeks before a wedding, someone coming to me and saying, I just got handed a prenup. First of all,
what's a good timeline to look at?
Well, I think everyone's timeline is different, but 3 to 4 months before your wedding, I think you need to start talking about it and getting even if it takes a couple months to get it drafted, I think you also have to understand that professionals have schedules too. And so you may be limited in who you can find that has availability to kind of drop everything and do something in a couple weeks, before a wedding, especially if you don't know what kind of product you're getting, from the other side or what's in it. And I think that's kind of some of the hardest ones I've done are, 2 weeks before the wedding and someone gets handed a document and it's like what I would call maybe an aggressive prenup.
Yeah.
And then, you're kind of like, well, I don't want to be the one to tell you that this is what your fiance is saying, but now you're in a position of having to negotiate this while getting ready for your wedding. It's tough. So I would just encourage anyone that may think that they want to, I've had people call me ahead of time or call another lawyer ahead of time, doesn't have to be me, and just say, like, what goes into a prenup? This is what I'm concerned about. Is this something that I should explore with my fiance? And then talk to them about it, and then try to find 2 lawyers that can kind of work together to help them, put their vision into place, rather than what I would call the traditional, like, go to a lawyer and say, this is what I want, please draft it, and then hand it to someone.
Yeah.
And the difficult conversation, I usually start it with, okay, explain to me what you guys are doing now. Like, and what conversations have you had? A lot of time they'll talk, it'll be around like a piece of real estate. I see a lot of prenups where people have either just bought a home together, they're contemplating buying a home together, and they've already had some conversations about how the mortgage is going to get paid, where the paycheck's going to go once you get married. Those are really good starting points because you already have some traction. You have more than you think in terms of what you've talked about to how you're going to run your finances during your marriage.
Definitely. I mean, that's already a step because we've talked to a lot of people who haven't even had those kind of conversations of how the bills are going to be split now that we're, kind of under one roof. So, what kind of terms do you see going into a prenup? What does that look like? Because it sounds like, which I want to kind of highlight here, is it's not, everything that your lawyer says has to go into the document and it's this way and you can hide behind your lawyer. It's very adjustable to whatever your goal is.
Right. So a lot of them there's two major reasons that people or two major components to a prenup, the contingencies. There could be an entire section just dealing with divorce. And then there could also be an entire section that deals in the event of death. So that's almost like an estate planning document. If there's going to be a really complicated provision in the event of death, I would highly recommend you get your estate planning attorney involved in that, because you don't want to have a document that then you have to amend later because you want to change your estate plan and the prenup didn't really, like, it didn't mesh. If you're going to talk about divorce, we put schedules on the agreement usually to say this is what everyone is bringing into the marriage and how that is going to be treated in the marriage.
Okay.
A major component of it. So it'll be somewhat both parties, what we call separate property, and then a joint exhibit. And so a lot of times a piece of real estate may go on there. If they're buying a home together, there may be like one joint checking account. And so that's kind of like point A, is this is what we're all bringing into the marriage. We have all of our assets listed. And then you'll talk about things like, you know, what is going to be marital property? And this is where people kind of can go all over the spectrum. Some people say, I just want to keep everything on these exhibits as my separate property. So what I have today is mine. But anything else that we get during the marriage, income, we're going to put that into a different account. And that's all going to be marital property. So it's like a freezing in time. You know,
Right.
This is what I have now, and it may increase in value, or I may like take something out and buy something else, and that'll all stay separate. But we're going to accumulate assets together during the marriage. We're going to grow, you know, our marital pie. And then the agreement would talk about what would happen to that marital pot in the event of divorce. So it would usually do an allocation, whether it's a 50-50, a 60-40. And the agreement can also talk about whether or not spousal support will be paid or won't be paid, and how attorney fees would be handled. It is prohibited to contract with respect to future children or current children. You cannot contract. So there is no contraction for any custody or child support. Anything related to children cannot be dealt with. If you contracted with it to it, it would just be held unenforceable and a court would not enforce it.
Humans are more than assets. And so, you know, it seems like, you know, you try to do some of this to either protect what you already have or protect maybe what inheritance you're going to come into. And I know some people kind of talk about getting a prenup or a postnup due to businesses that they have created because, you know, I want, you know, your business is Michelle Lawless. You want to make sure that business is always under you, no matter what happens between you and your partner, which I know is another reason why people might get these done as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of different business provisions depending on the very specific issue. And it can depend upon whether or not your business is solely owned by you or whether or not you have partners, whether you contemplate investors are going to, you know, come in and get a share in the future. And one of the things that, you know, we discuss if there is a business involved is whether or not that business is really going to fund the family lifestyle. And if you did get divorced, how would that impact the family? Because a lot of times if you do have a family business that is funding the family lifestyle and expenses, there's two components to that. You have the value of the business, but then you also have the cash flow, right? The income that is coming in. And you need to make sure that the business, which is quite often the single largest asset in that marital estate, if parties get divorced, can continue to operate. because that's usually the lifeblood of how all the expenses get paid and how you pay for college and how you pay the mortgage. So you want to make sure that that business doesn't get caught up in a divorce case. What does that mean? It means making sure that someone can't come in, making sure your operating agreements are sound,
Right.
making sure that if both parties have a ownership interest in the business, that definitely needs to be dealt with in terms of you cannot be in a log jam for business decisions if you are also going through a divorce. So making sure there is a way for the business to continue to operate. And depending upon whether it's a really small company or you have a board, you've just got to make sure that that company, because this is what I've learned. No one in any way, shape, or form wants to get involved with a business where people are going through a divorce and the business is like an integral part of the divorce. I mean, employees don't want to deal with it. Board members don't want to deal with it. Every time I've dealt with a situation like that, it can be really, really difficult. So you want to treat your business like a true separate entity and make sure that it's protected. And a lot of times that can also mean just making sure that someone doesn't have to liquidate shares or membership units in the event of a divorce, which could obviously have huge financial repercussions on the family.
It sounds like a lot to juggle, especially if if that company that you're both in is bringing in all the income. You also can't let that stop because you got a lot of you have a lot of balls moving in the air.
Right? You've got to make sure that is something that you're thinking proactively ahead of time about what can happen. Yeah.
And so then if you're you do this prenup and you're in a marriage, do you have to really think about this document again? Does this really affect your marriage as you go through, or is this really only kind of brought up if you decide to separate or go different ways?
So a lot of times we'll say, oh, I hope you just can put this in a drawer and not, think about it and, run your life as if you didn't have it. This is your insurance policy. This is kind of, you've decided in the event that you got a divorce that this is, how it's going to be handled. I think I don't want to say naive is not the right word, but it is a legally binding contract. So depending upon the terms that are in there and depending upon how things shake out, you may need to think about it. I mean, I've done ones where people have agreed that they're going to kind of keep track of their income every year. So obviously they're not going to put that in a drawer and not look at it. And then, I've done other ones where really the only purpose was because someone was going to inherit some money down the line. And, we drafted that. And so when that inheritance comes in, they know what they're doing, but everything else was pretty much as if the agreement didn't exist. So they don't really need to, other than that inheritance, they don't really need to think about it. This is just observationally, I think a lot of times it's people in the second marriages who are coming into that second marriage older. They may have children, they may have grandchildren, and they have assets. That's a very different prenup than our younger, I would call them children, even though they're not, but a younger couple who really doesn't have a lot and they are doing it to protect potential inheritance. The second marriages, they have a lot of stuff, right? Like they've got assets, they've got retirement accounts, they have obligations to children that they need to meet. They're probably going to be a little bit more aware of the contents on a daily basis, just because their lives are naturally just a little bit more complicated. They probably went through a divorce before and are trying to maybe correct, some of the problems that they had in their prior divorce proceedings.
I could see a whole family thing going down if, they get remarried and now that estate that, you know, somebody had is going to be split between your kids and their kids, you know, and that's 5 kids now versus just the 2 or just the 3, you know, I mean.
A lot of people try to avoid that situation. That is exactly what people are trying to avoid, is that fight between potential children down the line.
Potential children. And even, you know, even sometimes the kids are older, so they don't even know each other that well, but it's like, enough that we're going to fight over it. No.
Right.
And then the last kind of question I have for you, unless anyone else wants to pop in any, is that, you know, what if we're married and then I think, no, we don't need this anymore? Can we just make our prenup disappear and make it invalid?
You can. Yeah, you can invalidate a prenup. You can sign an agreement. It should be notarized. I mean, you should go back to lawyers to do kind of an official nullification of it, but you can nullify it. It is a private agreement. So it's, you know, it's not filed anywhere. It's private. There's no record. It's not like you record a mortgage or something. It's a private agreement. You can nullify it. And the other thing that some people do put in their agreements are what are called sunset clauses. And a sunset clause, a lot of times done with a younger couple, will basically say, you know, if, you know, on the blank anniversary, whatever they want to say, could be 10 years, 15, 20-year anniversary of our wedding. This agreement, by operation of itself, sunsets, meaning it no longer exists. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you could make it, if you want to say, like, we're married for 20 years, we're just going to pretend we didn't have this prenup. You know, and some people are really just trying to protect against that short-term divorce where they, you know, 5 to 7 years, and, you know, they just don't want to have to spend a lot of fees or arguing over things. So that is one way that people just do a sunset provision, and then you don't have to go back to a lawyer or anything. You just, it's sunsets.
It's very interesting. I've never heard of that before, but it makes a lot of sense. So great, you know, it's a document. Prenups are a document you would sign before your wedding. Really, you want to focus on what you're trying to accomplish, whether that's, you know, keep your families kind of separate, if it's an older or a second marriage, or maybe an inheritance. You just don't want, you want to make sure that kind of stays under your name. But you can always get these edited if you needed to, later in life, always again with an attorney.
Yeah. And people do amendments too. People do amendments all the time just because something changes, and you can agree. You just have to do it the right way. An amendment over dinner is not legally binding.
Noted. And then how much does this document cost? Is it by document? Is it by hours? Is it a bit of both?
At least, I mean, I don't know the geographic region of where people are watching it. You know, at least in the Chicagoland area, it still is hourly. And, you know, usually the attorney that does the initial drafting does the heaviest lifting. Usually the review doesn't take, you know, because you're reviewing a document. Another reason to make sure everyone's on the same page in the beginning, because it's a lot cheaper to have a meeting and realize that you're not on the same page than to pay someone to draft an agreement that someone receives and says, no way am I signing. Because now you're just going to have to start from the ground up.
And so can you do a prenup with one attorney if both parties are there agreeing on it?
At least in the state of Illinois, you cannot, because the rules of professional conduct don't allow one lawyer to represent both parties. I will also say, as far as, I should mention this, just enforceability of prenups, like this may be the most important thing I say. Like in Illinois, it is getting extremely hard to invalidate a prenup. So do not sign something without contacting not just like, oh, I know this lawyer who's my neighbor. You know, you need to contact someone who works in family law, estate planning, you know, really understands what you're signing. The recent case law is very restrictive in terms of being able to overturn a prenup. So I think some people may be like, oh my God, it's a week before my wedding, I'm getting handed this, I'm just going to sign it and I'll deal with it later. You're probably going to be bound by it.
Yeah, that's a lot of money to deal with later. talk early, talk often,
talk early. Yeah.
talk with professionals. Because at the end of the day, it's not public, but it is a legal document.
It is a legal document, and they end up in front of judges. If someone says like, well, I don't want to be bound by it anymore. Too bad. Like, I agreed now. I agreed then. I don't agree now. If it gets before a judge, at least in Illinois, it is getting hard. The judge is probably going to enforce it unless there are some of the cases, the circumstances are quite drastic and they're still enforcing it. So
wow.
Don't sign.
You need to have these conversations, which is, why we want to bring it to the table and kind of give this information because, we always hear about, maybe the uber rich who's uber, and don't want to, wants to have a prenup. But it's very, normal, I guess, for people. For the everyday Joe to have one.
There's millennials that are doing it just to take care of debt and make sure that people, if they're in the middle of school, if they're doing some very expensive postgraduate type of program and they're incurring a lot of debt, they want to make sure that, they're not obligated for each other's debt. If there's a ton of credit card debt that's got, those are all things that you can put into an agreement, just like assets. So a lot of millennials are actually saying like, I just want to have this taken care of because we have so much debt, student loan debt right now.
And I've heard people who get divorced and the debt splits and it's like, I'm 30,000 in debt and I didn't even get a college degree, It's pretty wild, especially, some of us who've just watched, the generations get divorced. So now it's like, I'm just going to cover what I have because I've seen this, with my parents or grandparents play out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's kind of like I've heard, and I'm not in real estate, but I've heard like kids that grew up in the '08 crisis have a very different view of, real estate because they have lived through that bubble bursting. And what our kids are going through now is just like, who knows what every generation kind of has their own, what they're trying to, protect against. So I think, I wish I had better advice for people on maybe how to start that conversation. But I think from what I've seen, the hardest conversations are the one where time is putting pressure on people. So that it's so easy to procrastinate difficult conversations, but having them early gives you a little bit of runway. To at least like it's out there, it's going to be weird, it's going to be awkward. And then the other thing I would just say is make sure you hire an attorney that you feel you can have a candid conversation with.
100%.
Because if you're just hiring a lawyer and you don't kind of interview a couple of people to make sure you're comfortable with that person, you've already taken an awkward process and now put yourself in a position where maybe you don't even really want to talk to the person that's supposed to be representing you. Don't do that to yourself.
You need someone to turn to.
Don't do that to yourself because it is kind of a but I will say this, like I think the conversation doesn't stay awkward for that long.
I agree.
I think it's just in the beginning getting the ball rolling, and really good professionals can really help facilitate those conversations. And it's not like it's just god awful forever, like a divorce is.
Well, again, what are you trying to accomplish? And if you share with your partner kind of what your goals are around that, hopefully they feel aligned with that as well. And so again, that's that conversation of you're going to marry this person. You got to have these hard conversations. What are you trying to accomplish?
And if you can get on the same page, it can be over like that. Like that's, if you're on the same page, and everyone says, okay, these are the terms. Lawyers, this is what we want. Go draft. There may just be one review. It does not have to be long and drawn out and arduous. So we can end on a happy note there, that it can be, accomplished very quickly and very easily if everyone's aligned.
I love that. And so I really appreciate you coming on today and giving us all this great advice, because I know it's not talked about enough. And so it's great to just get all the juicy details. What is the best way for people to contact you or reach out if they are thinking about doing this, I guess, in the Cook County region?
Yeah, email is, and I see my email at the bottom of the screen there, but email is probably the best way for you to reach out to me, so I can just, everything is kind of done by email, but my intake process is exclusively by email these days.
Awesome. Awesome. Michelle's also a Purse Strings approved professional, so you can check her out on our site, pursestrings.co. If you need an attorney in your state, just reach out and we can help you find somebody to work with us as well. Because I know attorneys are a bit harder. You have to get them in your right state.
Yes. You know, and I should have said that. Prenups are state-based. Really important. Yes. So if you are listening to me and you do not live in Illinois, you need to find an attorney. Yes. So family law is still state-based in this country, and it will be probably forever. So the prenup is always drafted and negotiated with the law where you reside, and there usually is a provision in there that says this state's law will control, because you are bargaining for the agreement based upon your current state law. So definitely you need to get a professional in your state to help you.
Now, if you do this, get married, have kids, and then move to Nebraska.
Yep.
Do you have to get a new prenup?
No, the prenup
will honor.
Exactly. The prenup will travel with you to Nebraska.
Okay.
And then, but it will be interpreted in Nebraska under Illinois law.
Got it. Awesome. Yeah. I don't know why Nebraska, but we're not going there. But thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a great month of talking about marriage and money and how we really need to have these open, candid conversations. They're not always the most fun. They're not always the most sexy, but they're so important, to protect ourselves and not get in trouble with the law. So thank you again, Michelle, for coming on today. And we will be back again here next month or next Thursday for another Lunch and Learn. So we'll talk to everyone soon.
Thanks so much.
Of course. Bye-bye.